Hello, I'm Elizabeth Dondinell. I'm from the East Bay Center for Anxiety Relief, and this is the first webinar that I presented to the Alameda Business Association on January 12th of 2021. And this is both for employers, sole proprietors, and employees. And I'm going to discuss with you today, this is the first part of a 4-part series on stress and overwhelm and all the emotions that most of us have been feeling during these times of COVID. And as a result of that, it makes it highly stressful and potentially more difficult to get up in the morning and manage your businesses or show up for work or deal with the protocols of COVID with customers. So there's so many pieces to this that can elevate your stress. And today I'm going to present the signs of stress. And then in the second webinar, I'm going to discuss how to manage the stress techniques, tools, remedies, and talk more specifically about insomnia, because that seems to be one of the bigger issues or things that arise when we're very stressed out, in particular these times. The third webinar it will be about communication. Communicating, one, how do you communicate as a leader about your stress and be comfortably transparent, but at the same time be able to build your team, support your employees, and support everyone. And then other communications, such as how do you communicate to your family about your stress and what's going on, employers or employees. And then in particular, how might you communicate with difficult customers or difficult people that are also showing signs of stress and are expressing themselves in a very irritable or harsh manner, and how not to take that personally. There's some real key things in communication that can be helpful for all those situations. And then the fourth one, we'll be discussing the potential of building this into a support group, which I would be happy to facilitate if the need arises, and happy to potentially look at a support group for employers and sole proprietors or entrepreneurs, and then one for employees. We wanted to start here to see what the need is and what you all are looking for. And then in the fourth webinar, we'll figure out and discuss where to go from there. Because one of the key things in these times is to be able to have a place to support. As you will hear in a minute, I'm going to discuss about this internal isolation that stress often causes and how it's enhanced by the COVID situation and the great value and importance of externalizing. And support groups are one way to do that, to be with a group of people, to check in, to acknowledge that you're not alone, and have that sense of community in a very difficult time. So that's the fourth webinar. So now I'm going to move forward on today's topic, which is SOS, or signs of stress. So how I define stress is, stress is physical or emotional or mental tension that you experience when you care about something. So we all go through stress, and in particularly the workplace is one of the places that generates a fair amount of stress, whether you're an employer or an employee or work there, because it's something you care about. Most of us care about our jobs. Most of us care about how we perform. If you're an employer, you care about your employees. And so there's going to be a certain level of stress in the day-to-day functions of the job. So that's already there. And then what I invite you to consider, because there are healthy levels of stress and then there are unhealthy levels of stress, okay? So measuring from a scale of 1 to 10, your stress level, healthy stress is from a 2 to a 5. 5's a little high, but I think these days, even a stress level of 5 is relatively healthy with everything that we have going on with our businesses and our families and in the world. What happens is that when your stress level gets to a 5 or higher and it lingers or it's consistent or reoccurring, then it creates a high degree of emotional upsetness, such as anxiety, depression, anger, overwhelm that is consistent and much higher, and creates obstacles in the day-to-day functioning. That's unhealthy stress. So I invite you to remember and consider that just because you're stressed doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. However, if your stress is lingering and consistent and reoccurring and it's creating emotional upsetness, which I'm going to explain in further detail in the next slide, then that's something to pay attention to, and especially if it's creating obstacles in your day-to-day functioning. So what are the physical signs of stress? Low energy. And what does low energy look like in the physical signs of stress? Well, what it looks like is that kind of low energy that you just are going through a slog, and like you feel like you're dragging your feet through everything, and what used to be, if not energetic, at least relatively mundane and easy to do or easy to flow through your day, is now becoming just difficult. So the day-to-day tasks, everything from getting out of bed to emptying the dishwasher, to putting your books together, if at work, to coming in on work on time. The things that might have been usually habitual patterns that you did fine and they just seem to flow through the day, that when you're highly stressed, they take a lot more energy and you feel like your energy is low. So it's different than just feeling tired, although that low energy can be contributed by that too, because oftentimes with stress, there's insomnia or difficulty sleeping, which then of course will impact your daily energy. So there's a couple of reasons for low energy, and how they can manifest as physical signs of stress is that difficulty of doing things that used to not be so difficult to do. Chest pains. Chest pains can come up, and then often that fuels anxiety, obviously, because when we have chest pains, we immediately think usually about our hearts and our health. And chest pains as a sign, a physical sign of stress, of course, do not mean a heart attack. Basically, what they mean is that literally your chest has tightened or it's constricted, and often as a result of shallow breathing. Because when we're stressed, we only breathe in the two top thirds of our lungs. We don't take those deep breaths that goes down to the bottom 1/3 of your lungs, literally. And when our breath doesn't go down and fill our lungs completely, two things happen. One, the chest literally starts to tighten up for two reasons. One, because we're just not expanding those muscles, but two, because that is also then sending messages to the body that something's not okay. The body's reading these signals all the time. And when we start shallow breathing, it goes into like red alert, what's going on? And so then our chest may tighten as a result of just starting to feel anxious or panicked. Okay. Headaches. Headaches are another physical symptom of stress or a sign of stress. And that's usually due to literally neck and shoulder tension or back tension. And, in this pandemic, so many of us are our computer and being online is so part of our day-to-day functioning. And if you don't have proper chairs, or and sitting correctly, your table's not the right height, all of those things can contribute to neck and muscle tension, which then literally tightens the muscles in the scalp, which press the scalp together in a way that can cause a headache. So headaches can be a physical sign of stress. The other thing that often happens when we're stressed that contributes to headaches, and some of the other things I'm just about ready to list, is dehydration. Oftentimes stress sucks us in so much internally, which I'm going to explain a little bit more in a minute, but it sucks us in internally so much that we forget. We forget to eat. We don't pay attention to how much we're drinking, or if we have low energy, we're drinking a lot of caffeinated tea or coffee, and we're not thinking about, hydrating. And that can cause headaches too. Grinding teeth is also a physical sign of stress. Grinding teeth while you're sleeping, and how you know you're doing it is your jaw will be aching when you get up in the morning, or grinding your teeth, for example, when you're really focused on something like a difficult call with work, or you're dealing with an intense work project, or maybe even doing something for your family that's causing stress. It typically happens when you're really absorbed in a focus on something that is stressful, or at night when you're sleeping. Upset stomachs. Upset stomachs are one of the most common physical signs of stress. And the reason for that is that when our body starts physiologically experiencing what's called the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism, which is what is triggered slightly too intensely when we're stressed, because the body's going red alert, be cautious, and it puts us into a flight, fight, or freeze. What begins to happen is it literally, our body's digestive system starts slowing down, because the body's alternating itself, going, okay, what do you need if you've got to run from the tiger in the jungle? Well, you don't need to eat right now, right? And so our digestive system starts slowing down. If we're stressed during the day and we're not running from the tiger in the jungle, but our body is responding in a way and it's as if we are, and then we go to eat lunch, guess what? We're not going to digest our food as well. And that happening repetitively can contribute to stomach acids, GERD. IBS is one of the more extreme physical signs of stress, because the digestive system has slowed down so much for so long. And so long-term, this can have long-term medical effects. Short-term is just a sign that, okay, I'm stressed. I've got to pay attention to this. I need to take care of myself, which I will be talking more about how you do that in the next webinar. Insomnia, like I said earlier here when I made the introduction, that I will be speaking directly on how to work with insomnia and some tips and tricks around that next week, because insomnia is also one of the big kind of heavy hitters as signs of stress. And there's two kinds of insomnia that are particular to signs of stress. And one is having that racing mind before you go to bed, and before you know it, you've been lying in bed for like an hour, hour and a half trying to solve all the problems of your workplace or of the world or whatever it is. And then you like toss and turn. The other kind of insomnia that is a classic symptom of stress is that waking up about 4 a.m, feeling like, oh, and then your brain immediately starts spinning on what do you got to do that day? How many things you got to do? Are you going to get everything done? Oh gosh, you forgot that phone call yesterday. And your mind just keeps going. Because what's happening at that time, if you've had some sleep, that space in the early morning is when our adrenals literally start pumping themselves up, because they're like, okay, let's get ready for the day. If your mind is active or you're just sleeping lightly, that adrenal surge can wake you up and then immediately connects you to, if you've had a racing mind, connects you right to your racing mind, and you're off and running, which then makes it difficult to go to sleep. Or then when you go back to sleep, often then the pattern becomes, so you're up for like a half an hour, you read a book, you go back to sleep 4:35, and then you sleep in until like 7. And sometimes then that gets progressively later and later, especially these times when many people are working at home or don't have a lot going on in the morning. This pattern can start becoming an obstacle. So I'm going to speak more to insomnia next week on some tips and tricks on that. Random body aches, that goes along with the chest pains and the headaches, and your body just gets tense. You're sitting too long in a certain position, you're not as aware of your body, like when you're sitting at your desk trying to figure things out, or you're sitting on the couch ruminating and you've sat there for an hour and you don't even realize it, and then your body starts hurting. It also, body aches are contributed by what I was talking about earlier, dehydration, not drinking things, or forgetting to drink water and drinking nothing but caffeine all day. So that is definitely a sign of stress. And then muscle tension, which I've spoke to throughout this, that is definitely a sign of stress. And it's above and beyond the normal, because some of you are like, well, Elizabeth, I get body aches and muscle tension a lot. That's true. Keep in mind that scale I presented earlier about the 0 to the 10. If you're in the 2 to 5 range, like with your body aches and your muscle tension, I mean, it's good to score these things once in a while. Then it's probably nothing. And a little bit of stretching and a refocusing is going to help. It's the lingering, consistent, or reoccurring levels of these signs and feeling stressed above a 5 or higher, then creating obstacles, that's when you're really stressed and you need to pay attention to it, or it would be a good idea to pay attention to it. Okay. So the emotional signs of stress, what are those? Well, here's how they play out. Whoops. Agitation, which you'll notice that you're uncharacteristically angry, anxious, agitated, or moody. And I think uncharacteristic is also a good word to hold. That signs of elevated stress, of unhealthy stress, are uncharacteristic things. So we all get agitated sometimes. But if you find yourself getting angry, anxious, agitated, or moody on a regular basis, or in ways that you hadn't seen yourself before, when times were calmer or things were different, that's an emotional sign of stress. It's the level of upsetness that our emotions create that is a good barometer to, is this healthy stress or unhealthy stress? Are these healthy feelings or unhealthy feelings? That also, with hopelessness, there's two parts to that. One is you just are like overcome with hopelessness, like a dread. And sometimes it can come out of nowhere. You know, you're just like there at work talking to someone, and all of a sudden it's like this pit in your heart, in your chest, or your stomach, and you just feel so hopeless. That's a sign of stress, because usually healthy stress, healthy hopelessness, if there is such a thing, but there is, typically is linked to something, right? But when it just kind of overcomes you. The other type of hopelessness is when you're overwhelmed with circumstances. So for example, that racing mind I talked about a minute ago, when you wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and then you're going through your, oh my gosh, I got to do this and I got to do that. I didn't get that done today. I need to make sure I finish that. And I got to call that person. No, our loan didn't come through and I need to follow up on that. And then there's a sense of dread and kind of maybe an experience of why bother? That's an example of being overwhelmed by circumstances with a racing mind, and how hopelessness can play out as an emotional sign of stress. Another one is withdrawal. And this is a key one to watch for, because it's a little tricky in these times, because isolating from people is part of what we're supposed to do here, right? Shelters in place, stay-at-home orders, social distancing, social pods, 6 feet apart. I mean, we all know the words. We've all been trying to practice them in some degree or another, or many of us have. And so it does create a natural state of isolating from people. But this withdrawal is more extreme, if you will. It's above and beyond the 6 feet apart or the social distancing. It's oh, you might find yourself canceling Zoom calls from your friends because you just don't want to talk, because your day hasn't been filled with anything. So why would you talk about anything? Finding reasons, and reasons popping up in your head of good reasons not to talk to people, not to reach out, not to follow up on things, not to return phone calls, right? And finding yourself doing that in more of an extreme manner and withdrawing more than what the protocols of COVID are really asking for. That is definitely something to look out for, because the more that you withdraw, the more it speaks to, and I'm going to highlight this in a moment, that internal isolation, which really feeds and festers stress and keeps it elevated. And that's not what you're looking for. You want to dial it down, right? So another one is personality changes. If you've noticed a sudden or gradual change in your behavior, and that could be anything from behaviors like safety behaviors, like your natural day. And if you find yourself, for example, wiping the counters off more than you used to, or washing your hands more than what's called for, even when, for example, you haven't even gone out, but you're starting to really like wash your hands raw because you're afraid of COVID, even though you haven't gone out all day or had any contact with people. That would be an example of a safety behavior that's been amped up because there's a real stressor in yourself that's saying things aren't okay. I need to keep myself safe. So behaviors like that, or behaviors that you're finding that you're needing to take showers more frequently, or that things out of place really bug you and you find yourself straightening things up more, right? Or the opposite, where you might have used to sit down and you always had the protocol, for example, that you needed a clean desk to start work. And now it doesn't matter. There's stuff everywhere, and you kind of get through the piles, and It's, you know, part of the low energy and all of that. Those are examples of potential personality changes that would be happening during this time. Okay. And once again, the keywords are sudden or gradual changes in your usual behavior. And then the last one here that I'm noting is self-neglect. And that's where you stop taking care of yourself, or you find yourself engaging in risky behaviors. You know, I wouldn't say this is self-neglect, but this is a way, it shows you how we're coping a little bit, and need to right now, as there's been an increase in purchases of alcohol. They've noted since COVID, because, you know, it helps take the edge off. That's not necessarily a lack of self-care or engaging in risky behavior. Now, if you find yourself, you know, drinking more than a couple of glasses of wine every night, where you used to only be a 1-glass wine drinker, and now you're drinking a whole bottle, and you do it 5 nights a week, that might be engaging in risky behavior. That's something to look at. See, so it would be a shift. Or stopping taking self-care, for example, that a week goes by and then you realize, wow, I haven't like taken my walk that I normally take. Or even the low energy and getting up too late to even like brush your teeth really quickly. And well, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to be on Zoom and nobody's going to smell my breath, kind of thing. That happening once in a while is not a big deal. Happening on a lingering or consistent or reoccurring basis, where you're neglecting that, or you're finding not taking shower for several days and you're not even remembering the last time you did personal care, that is an emotional sign of stress. Okay. All right. So I've laid out the physical and emotional signs of stress. And now what I'm going to introduce to you are the patterns of stress. So when these physical and emotional symptoms start occurring, and they're creating a level of emotional upsetness, which is level 5 or higher on a measuring scale of 1 to 10, what happens is they come together and they start generating patterns of a continual sense of overwhelm, right? Either internal or by circumstances, as I noted earlier. And this overwhelm is like continually there, and it just, you can't catch a break, kind of thing. Every day is just like so many things to do. And even maybe when a new task comes across your desk, or when you realize you have to do something else, it just seems so big, even though before COVID, or when you weren't as stressed out, it was just something you did, right? When you get that sense of continual overwhelm or consistent and lingering overwhelm, then what starts fueling it, because our brains, we're trying to help ourselves out, but this thinking process called ruminating, which is exactly what a cow does when they chew grass, they run it through 4 different stomachs. And so they turn it over and over again. That's the actual definition of ruminating. But for humans, what that looks like is us running a thought through our head over and over again, running a situation or scenario in our brains over and over again. And the intention behind it is good. We're trying to solve a problem. We're trying to help ourselves calm down. If I could only get this right, I'd feel better, sort of thing. Or I'm so worried about my employees and I want to make sure that they're feeling comfortable, or that they have a place to talk, or they're doing okay. What are the things I can do? And oh gosh, she was so upset yesterday, and she was so upset that day, and this happened that day. And see, that kind of thinking is worrying and ruminating, and you're thinking, and it's alluring, if you will, because you get the feeling that you're trying to solve a problem, but actually what's happening is you're stuck, because you're stuck in all the places where the emotional charge is about the situation, about the upset employee, or wanting to make them happy and feeling really guilty and bad that you're not doing enough. And you keep going back to that landmine of emotions. And actually what you're only doing is you're churning those emotions in a way, they're spinning in the emotional center of our brain in a way that's elevating them more. So the very thing that you're trying to do, and this is why ruminating doesn't work, and I'll tell you what does work in a minute. Ruminating doesn't work is because it becomes useless worry, right? And it actually can just increase the very feelings that you're trying to help yourself cope. So where you want to shift it, and I'm going to speak more to this in the next webinar, is to useful examination and analysis. And how you know that you're examining and analyzing something is that it actually generates an action. It actually helps you break things down into smaller steps so you can move forward. It takes you out of the overwhelm. It takes you out of the worry, right? And that's how you know you're moving forward. But if you're spinning, right, because then the ruminating generates, here we got overwhelm, ruminating I spoke to, and then ruminating generates this style of thinking, which is global thinking, which then everything becomes big, and you're not breaking things down. You just keep seeing the big picture. You just keep seeing the upsetness at work, the upsetness with your family, the fact that this hasn't happened, the fact that that hasn't happened, right? And it can get very negative, which also fuels into catastrophizing and going catastrophic. And that's a real classic one that will lead more into anxiety and further levels of stress and panic. Global thinking typically feeds more into the depressive, hopeless side of things, right? But they're both ineffective and really get cultivated when you're ruminating, because once again, it keeps you stuck. Going into a catastrophic style of thinking are like the what ifs. Well, what if what if we run out of toilet paper, and then what if the stores run out of toilet paper, and then we don't have toilet paper again, and what if we don't have flour, and then I can't bake cookies, and then my children are going to be, and we're going to be homeless on the streets, right? It's that going from 0 to 60 in your thinking, and thinking one what if, and then it takes you to the very worst case scenario, just like that, right? That is a pattern of stress, and continually fueled is only going to elevate your stress more. And all of these, the overwhelm, ruminating, global thinking, catastrophic thinking, then pull on us and put us into what's called internal isolation. The 4 things there pull us in, and it becomes a mood and a place where we go internally, and we stop talking about it, but we're spinning it in our heads, or we're keeping it inside, and the overwhelm keeps growing, and the ruminating keeps going, and the 4 a.m. wake ups are continually happening, and we get more and more internal, to the point where you have an experience sometimes when you go through your day that you're interacting with people, yet you're kind of disconnected, because all of this is going on in the back of your brain. And while you're talking to a customer, for example, you're really worried about whether you're going to be able to get your grocery order in on time to have dinner, right? Or you're, thinking about all the things that are wrong in the back of your head. Meanwhile, you're talking to somebody or interacting with someone. And there's literally a disconnect, because emotionally, you are not present. Physically, you might be present to what's going on in front of you, but you're not connected to it in a full being way, emotionally and mentally, because a lot of your mental and emotional is getting sucked inward by overwhelm, ruminating, and these styles of thinking. And there's some other styles too. And so that is something you want to be aware of. And that is definitely a pattern of stress. And next week, I'm going to provide antidotes, remedies, tips, and tricks for that. Because this is something, this internalized isolation, something we're all very vulnerable to in this COVID time, because there's also a level of physical isolation, as I explained earlier, and as most of you fully know, and probably everybody listening to this knows that, right? And so it's important to understand this and have the language for these things so you can begin to bring them to conscious awareness and identify them. Because if you know that you're a ruminator and you're identifying this, then there are things you can do with that to shift it. And I'm going to be explaining that in the next webinar. Now, how all of these manifest then, the last one here I'm going to speak to is irritability. While this is all going on inside, our heads are spinning, and the end of the world keeps going round and round in our head, and we're getting sucked into all of that, we're more irritable when we interact with people, or others are more irritable with us. So if you remember earlier when I said, if you run across somebody who's very irritable, especially in this time, it's important not to take it personally, because more than likely it is a manifestation of their own stress and their own internal isolation than it has anything to do with what's going on, especially if it seems off or odd, or especially if you feel off or odd and you're kind of like, why did I just react like that? More than likely in these times, that is a pattern of stress. And the irritability also can be used more as a barometer to let you know, oh gosh, I haven't exercised in a little bit, or to do a self-check, which I'm going to lay out more next week for you. So today's intention was just to explain the signs and symptoms of stress physically and emotionally, and then how it the patterns that those signs create more. And you've noticed most of this is a mental experience that then fuels the moods of depression and feelings of hopelessness and dread, and then mood of anxiety and panic and worry, and hopefully give you a vocabulary and more of an understanding so that you can just collect data. That's what I invite you to do now. Collect data, just observe yourself and see, are any of these things relative to you, or do they resonate? Are they happening in your life, right? Because when you're consciously aware of it, then you can do something about it. Because also one of the things that stress does, because of this internal isolation, it sucks us in so that we actually can lose perception of ourself. And that stressful world that's internal seems like it's 100% true and valid, and it is the only thing that exists, when actually that's not true. There's truth in the fact that, yeah, you're stressed, but being aware of the signs and the patterns then can help you move towards, oh, okay, now this is what I need to do. And these things become more of a barometer rather than your day-to-day reality. So I hope that you found this helpful, and I will be presenting again next Tuesday. And this is who I am and my contact information. And have a good week. Take good care. Bye.